I think the first thing I must do is to convey to you the very warm and loving greetings of the Universal House of Justice. I was asked at the last meeting I attended to convey to the friends their loving greetings. As you all know, the theme of this meeting is a consideration of the importance of the Mount Carmel projects and the needs of these projects at this time. In your programs, there is an extract from a cable sent by the Universal House of Justice to your National Spiritual Assembly. I will read to you the entire cable. Deeply concerned, review ARC Projects Fund indicates rate flow contributions lamentably low. If outpouring funds not sharply accelerated, 3-year plan, 3-year plan goal will not be attained with damaging consequences. Progress vital project. $40 million needed course this final year of plan. Essential take further steps through series well-planned, well-attended meetings, friends in North America and Europe, addressed by a member of the Universal House of Justice. So the first question I think that we might well ask ourselves is, why is this project so important? Is it because it is a Baha'i World Center project? Is it because we are contributing to certain edifices and gardens and so on, which will be silent teachers of the cause worldwide as people come there as tourists and so on? Yes, it is partly true to say that, but that's not the whole picture. This project on Mount Carmel, we must realize, is associated with all 4, if I may say, luminaries of our faith, our 3 central figures, the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdu'l-Baha, as well as our beloved guardian. Baha'u'llah made it known that the remains of the Bab had to be transferred to the Holy Land and interred on the slopes of Mount Carmel. 2 years before he passed away, he went to the mountain himself from Akka and pitched his tent on a site which Shoghi Effendi used to describe as the head of Mount Carmel. And there he revealed the tablet of Carmel. In that tablet of Carmel, which Shoghi Effendi describes as the charter of the institutions to be established on Mount Carmel, he refers to the city of God. Shoghi Effendi made it very clear that this reference to the city of God was a reference to the shrine of the Bab. He also referred to the Ark of God with a K. And Shoghi Effendi explained that this Ark of God was the world administrative seat of the Baha'i faith. So a spiritual center, the city of God, and the administrative center, the Ark of God, were to be established on Mount Carmel. And this was in the plan of Baha'u'llah. The significance, therefore, of this project is that it has its roots in divine revelation, and that the heads of our faith have been working so assiduously over the years, over the decades, in order to bring it about. Up to this point in 1995, when there is a crisis. And in order to share with you the dimensions of this crisis, the House of Justice decided to send one of its members to you. The House of Justice realizes that not only in the United Kingdom, but throughout the world, many sacrifices have been lovingly made. And for these sacrifices, the House of Justice is deeply grateful. But the House of Justice also realizes that the financial resources of the Baha'i world are currently distributed with as much inequality as exists in the world's economy and finance. When I say that the Baha'is of the world are doing their utmost, just before I left, we received a report from the convention in Zaire, this afflicted, poor country, which, as we know, we have just heard on the news, they now have a further ordeal to deal with in terms of a virus which is prevalent in the area. From the convention of this Zaire, a country which has very poor communications, very bad communications from province to province. It has many financial problems, political problems. The convention meets, and I'll read you this brief paragraph from the report. During the convention, a challenge was made for Zaire to contribute 1 unit during the course of the last year of the 3-year plan, owing to the reference in the Rizwan message to the need for $40 million. There was an immediate and moving response by almost 100% of the participants, who answered the call by singing and emptying their pockets into a box that was provided for the purpose. The total amount collected was the equivalent of $125, plus the touching contribution of a man's watch. I can assure you, dear friends, that the rest of the world is trying their utmost to meet the challenge. You know, I think of it like this. I may be wrong, but I'll think of it like this, that there is a boat, and we are all trying to push this boat forward. There are a number of people who are rowing, and they're doing their best. God only knows. But among them, there are 3 athletes, or 4 athletes, or 5 athletes who are also there. The question is, are they doing their utmost? Or are they doing something which would be relative to what the others are doing? That is the question that the House of Justice is looking at. And they believe that these athletes are able to pull that boat all on their own. But because it is universal participation, we all row together. It is quite natural for the friends to ask questions such as, all right, you have to carry out the vision of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi. Why now? All right, you have to do something about these projects. Why so vast and extensive? Why so costly? Back in the 1970s, as my good brother David Hoffman well remembers, who is seated here in front of me, these things were considered at that time, some 25 years ago. The House of Justice realized that it was faced with 3 imperatives. Two of these were pressures from outside the Baha'i community and within the World Center itself. And one, the third, which overshadowed the first 2, came from the texts and the vision of the course. On the first imperative, the House of Justice realized that it had inherited some 60 acres of land on Mount Carmel. In the very heart of this 60-acre plot was the shrine in all its glory. There was this symbolic, rudimentary flight of steps that Shoghi Effendi had provided for us. The terrace on which the shrine was built was beautiful, elaborate, extensive. Behind, nothing. Ahead, only this flight of steps. To protect the prestige of the faith, this land could not be left undeveloped for too long. People were asking questions. When are you going to develop this land? We hear Abdu'l-Baha has spoken about terraces here. Where are they? The second imperative was from within. As the House of Justice realized that it needed more staff and yet more staff. I recall very well that at the time when this thing was going on, these discussions were going on, we had about 10 members of the staff. We now have over 600. So the House of Justice realized that the work of the faith was expanding very rapidly, and it could not carry on with the limited space in the old pilgrim house. The third imperative was from the texts, and that overshadowed the other 2. The House of Justice realized that Shoghi Effendi had more or less tied the hands of the House of Justice in terms of timing. I'll read you this text, and I'm sure you are all familiar with it. You've studied it, you've discussed it. In the early 50s, Shoghi Effendi sent this message to the Baha'i world. He wrote, after making reference to the archives building, he said, "The raising of this edifice will in turn herald the construction in the course of successive epochs of the formative age of the faith of several other structures which will serve as administrative seats of divinely appointed institutions." And then he names what the institutions are. "These edifices will, in the shape of a far-flung arc and following a harmonizing style of architecture, surround the resting places of the greatest holy leaf, of her brother, and of their mother. The ultimate completion of this stupendous undertaking will mark the culmination of the development of a worldwide divinely appointed administrative order, whose beginnings may be traced as far back as the concluding years of the heroic age of the faith. This vast and irresistible process, unexampled in the spiritual history of mankind, and which will synchronize with two no less significant developments: the establishment of the lesser peace and the evolution of Baha'i national and local institutions, the one outside and the other within the Baha'i world, will attain its final consummation in the golden age of the faith through the raising of the standard of the most great peace and the emergence in the plenitude of its power and glory of the focal center of the agencies constituting the world order of Baha'u'llah." Now, a number of points emerge when you look at this passage from the letter of Shoghi Effendi. Because of the time, I wanted to elaborate my notes, but I think I will just read from my notes in order not to keep you too long here. This passage, regarding this passage, we must be very careful not to misinterpret or misrepresent Shoghi Effendi's statement. Abdu'l-Baha said on more than one occasion that the lesser peace would emerge during this century. And it's clear that he meant the 20th century according to the Gregorian calendar. Shoghi Effendi further clarified that this emergence would require to be consolidated, and that this consolidation would take place in the course of future epochs of the formative age of the faith. This passage that I'm referring to is a letter to the Baha'is of the East. So some of you from the West may not have seen this, about the emergence of the lesser peace as distinct from the consolidation of the lesser peace. Shoghi Effendi in the above passage is making another prediction, namely that the three processes will synchronize: the establishment of the lesser peace, the construction of the edifices around the ark, and the evolution of local and national institutions. Now, the lesser peace can only come about as a result of world convulsions. How strange and mysterious it is that all major undertakings throughout the history of the faith have always coincided with difficulties and problems and crises in the outside world. Let me now deal with the question of why is it so vast and extensive? You realize that from the top of the mountain till the foot of the mountain is 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer of gardens interspersed with stairs and some buildings on the sides and here and there. as to the width, is some 250 meters wide when you consider the terraces as well as the breadth needed for the arcs, for the arc buildings. You have to realize that the mountainside, those of you who have been on pilgrimage know this. The mountainside is such that everything to the east of the shrine is high, and everything in front of the shrine and to the west is low. Mount Carmel is like that at that point. So we needed to excavate on the eastern side, then maybe have to transport all this rubble and stone somewhere to pay for that. And then later on, if we were going to build the terraces, we had to buy landfill and put it here. So the house realized that it would be far more economical if the landfill removed here could be just brought to this side. And the two projects, the arc buildings and the terraces, became complementary, and they had to be undertaken simultaneously. These are facts that architects will be able to confirm. Why so costly? All right. You know, the cost of the seat of the House of Justice, which was completed in 1982-83 and took 10 years to build, cost the House of Justice and you, the Baha'i world community, $27 million. It was estimated that if the seat had not been built then, and if the seat were to be built now, together with the other buildings, it would cost, if we were to give this to an outside contractor, it would cost the Baha'i world today $80 million because of the inflation and all the problems in Israel. The floor space of the buildings now being erected, which includes the buildings around the arc as well as the few buildings that have to be part of the terraces, floor space is 5 times the floor space we now have in the seat of the House of Justice. If you take this estimate of 80 and multiply it today, as of today, by 5, you get $400 million. 5 times 80 is 400. The estimate as we have it today is 250 million. Why? Because we are observing the strictest economy, believe me. We have very, very efficient management. We have many volunteers, Baha'is, who are giving of their time and their effort and their expertise free of charge. That's why it's costing us so much less. It's less expensive. Today, there are building aircrafts that are going to be used for military services and purposes, which cost several times more what we are spending on Mount Carmel, just for one aircraft. And the life expectancy of that aircraft is about 10 years. And the House of Justice is building what they are doing on Mount Carmel on your behalf for a whole dispensation and beyond. Look at the Acropolis in Athens. It is standing there in full glory for some 2,500 years. what is being built on Mount Carmel is not for 10 years, is not for 100 years. It is for the entire dispensation and beyond. This is what you are contributing to. Before we leave this subject, there is another thought that we hear sometimes from the friends. What about the crying needs of humanity? What are we doing about what is happening in this continent, the other continent, the problems in Yugoslavia, in Somalia, in Rwanda, all over the world? What about all these earthquakes that are taking place? Shouldn't we be contributing money for such purposes? Surely this is a humanitarian, worthy effort. All right, there are special relief organizations for that. But who's going to do the work of the faith? We don't accept money from anybody, from governments or foundations or whatever funding agencies there may be in the world. We won't accept a cent. We say that this is a gift of the Baha'is to the world. There are so many organizations in the world that are doing this sort of thing. We are building the nucleus of the world order of Baha'u'llah. We are building edifices and gardens to beautify those edifices with the Universal House of Justice at its head, an institution which Shoghi Effendi has described the last refuge of a tottering civilization. This is what we are contributing to, so that this nucleus may operate, so that this refuge may come about and raise its head amongst the nations. There is yet another point, I think, which needs to be addressed. I referred to it briefly, and I would like to elaborate a little bit. Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Aqdas tells us that the world's equilibrium has been upset and mankind's ordered life has been revolutionized through the emergence of his wondrous system, the world order of Baha'u'llah, the like of which no eye has witnessed. Okay. This is what the House of Justice is doing there. They're raising up this very heart and nerve center of this world order of Baha'u'llah. This is what they're doing on that mountain. With every stone laid, with every inch of garden provided and created, certain forces are being released in the world today. We must believe this. We must accept this. Baha'u'llah says so, that the emergence of his world order revolutionizes the affairs of mankind. He uses very strong language. He says, the time for the destruction of the world and its people hath arrived. Again, the day is approaching when we will have rolled up the world and all that is therein and spread out a new order in its stead. When the appointed hour hath come, there shall suddenly appear that which will cause the limbs of mankind to quake. Then, and only then, will the divine standard be unfurled. You are weaving that divine standard now. Then and only then will the divine standard be unfurled, and the nightingale of paradise warble its melody. Shoghi Effendi described this very dramatically when he wrote in his letters that we are witnessing the death pangs of a disintegrating society, and we are also witnessing the birth pangs of this new order. This helps. The 4 points I want to deal with are: is there a difference in the quality of contributions when an element of sacrifice is involved? I'm going to address that very briefly. Then I'm going to have a look briefly on our teachings on the subject of wealth and poverty. I will also make references to the attitude of service acceptable in the eyes of Baha'u'llah. And I'm going to speak about the spirit of Baha'i service and whether it is important or is it as important as the form of service. Now, I'll read you these two passages from the letters of Shoghi Effendi on the question of sacrifice. He says, speaking about the temple in Wilmette, he says, this campaign cannot yield its richest fruit unless and until the community in its entirety participate in this nationwide sacrificial effort. Nor can this collective effort be blessed to the fullest extent possible unless the contributions made by its members involve acts of self-abnegation, not only on the part of those of modest means, but also by those endowed with substantial resources. I remember about the temple in Wilmette, Mrs. May Maxwell said that there was a dear Baha'i in Chicago who taught piano lessons, and she always set aside a little money for the temple in Wilmette. One day, Mrs. Maxwell asked this dear lady, "Have you seen the temple lately?" She said, "No." "Why?" She said, "I can't afford it. It cost 25 cents. Mrs. Maxwell said, I took her with me to show her the temple. When she saw it, the first thing she said, "Oh, my darling. Oh, my darling. This is sacrifice." Shoghi Effendi again, all, no matter how modest their resources, must participate. There are many in this room who speak English and write English better than I do. There is a difference between must and should. He doesn't say should participate. He says must participate. All, no matter how modest their resources, must participate. Upon the degree, now listen to this, of self-sacrifice involved in these individual contributions will directly depend the efficacy and the spiritual influence which these institutions will exert. There is a new component that adds itself to that money that is being spent in order to create this building or this garden. And that is how much sacrifice has gone in that money. It's not only the cash. It is the cash plus the spirit with which it has been given, and whether it is with sacrifice or without sacrifice. This is what he's telling us. Abdu'l-Baha used to say this meal when he was invited for dinners and so on. He says, This meal is very delicious because it was prepared with love. Let me now read to you a few passages about wealth and poverty. You are all familiar with these, but never mind. On wealth, Baha'u'llah, having attained the stage of fulfillment and reached his maturity, man standeth in need of wealth. Know ye in truth that wealth is a mighty barrier between the seeker and his desire, the lover and his beloved. By God, in earthly riches, fear is hidden and peril is concealed. From Abdu'l-Baha. The riches of this world resemble hills of sand, which the wind moveth every day from place to place. Today you see some sand in one place, the next day you see that it has completely vanished and no trace of it remaineth. The wind hath blown the sand to another place, some 2 miles away, and hath formed another heap. In brief, riches are like unto movable hills of sand. They come, they go. Therefore, to the people of understanding, they have no significance. Now, let's just read a few passages from Baha'u'llah about the poor. Great is the blessedness awaiting the poor, that endureth patiently and that endure patiently and conceal their sufferings. And well is it with the rich, who bestow their riches on the needy and prefer them before themselves. Please God, the poor may exert themselves and strive to earn the means of livelihood. From Abdu'l-Baha, if ye are poor, God out of his bounty will enrich you. Expend what hath been bestowed upon you. Verily, he is potent over all things. Soon will God compensate with the best reward those who believe and give of their substance in his path, and he will cause them to enter his most holy and everlasting paradise. Now, the way I summarize it and I understand it is like this. He's telling the poor, dear friend, be patient. Conceal your poverty. Earn your means of livelihood. Despite your modest resources, give in the path of God. About the rich, Baha'u'llah, well is it with him who, being rich, is not hindered by his riches from the eternal kingdom, nor deprived by them of imperishable dominion. By the most great name, the splendor of such a wealthy man shall illuminate the dwellers of heaven as the sun enlightens the people of the earth. Rejoice not in the things ye possess tonight. Tonight they are yours, tomorrow others will possess them. Thus warneth you he who is the all-knowing, the all-informed. Would the people of the world who have amassed riches and have debarred themselves from the truth know to whom their treasures will be passed on? Nay, by the reality of Baha, no one knoweth, save exalted be he. Shoghi Effendi, writing to the friends in the United States, it is therefore imperative for the individual believer, and particularly for the affluent, the independent, the comfort-loving, and those obsessed by material pursuits, to step forward and dedicate their resources, their time, their very lives, to a cause of such transcendence that no human eye can even dimly perceive its glory. Let them resolve instantly and unhesitatingly to place, each according to his circumstances, his share on the altar of Baha'is sacrifice, lest on a sudden, unforeseen calamities rob them of a considerable portion of the earthly things they have amassed. Let's look at this passage from Abdu'l-Baha. When divine confirmations are vouchsafed, though a person may offer a treasure every moment, his possessions will yet increase. Shoghi Effendi, using this maybe as a precedent, says, be like a fountain, and don't be worried whether the water will come. He says, I repeat this, though a person may offer a treasure every moment, his possession will yet increase, and his wealth will yet turn even into a mighty stream. Should divine assistance be cut off, the sea will dry up, and mighty rivers will become naught but a vain mirage. Know of a certainty that as a result of this contribution, your agriculture, industry, and trade will be blessed several-fold. The recompense of the doer of a goodly deed is tenfold. It is most certain that Almighty God shall confirm bountifully those who give in his path. The last 2 points I'm going to deal with is the whole attitude of Baha'i service. Listen to this, these few words of Shoghi Effendi, written in 1922 January, just about 2 months after his grandfather passed away. January 1922. The time has come for the friends the world over to think not as to how they should serve the cause, but how the cause should be served. You know, this passage has been quoted by Abdu'l-Baha in The Priceless Pearl. Now, what's the difference between the two? The difference could be elusive, but there is a fundamental difference. When you make yourself the center of all things, then you give what you can give, what you can afford to give, what you think you should give. But when the center of your life is not yourself, but is the cause of God, then you think about the needs of the cause, what the cause needs are, and I'll go forward and help. In the first case, you are the center. In the second situation, the cause is the center. It's a world of difference. It is like, shall I say, we all have parents. We all love our parents, undoubtedly. The parents also love us. But do you think that our love for our parents has the same intensity as the love that the parents have for us, particularly the mother? Think it's the same? It's not the same. The love of the parents is far greater, far more intense. The mother thinks about her child all the time. Not once every 2-3 weeks, but all the time. Shoghi Effendi is telling us, as I understand it, friends, this is the infant faith of God. It has its needs. Go to it and see what it says. Help it, whether it's midnight or otherwise. It's an emergency. See what the child needs. This is the infant faith of God, the promised faith of God. Just a few words about spirit and form. You know, in Israel, there are very intelligent people who ask us questions. They see these developments on Mount Carmel. I'll tell you some of the questions they ask. Do you have membership fees? Do you have annual fees that you have to pay? It's as if it's a golf club or something. Do you have the equivalent of rabbis? Do you have an honor list where names of major donors are announced? To all these questions we say no, no, no. Then they say, well, how do you do it? How do you do it? The Baha'i system is unique. It is left to the conscience of the individual. It's left to the love of the individual. Baha'u'llah wants us to be lovers. He doesn't want us just to be believers who have recognized his station as the manifestation of God for today. He says, after recognition, you must be steadfast in my love. Then you must, if you want to obey my commandments, obey them for love of me. It's all love. You're tired, I'm tired. I still have some notes. What shall I do? I'm going to skip a few. Yeah. I want to tell you a little story. How about that? I was present in Haifa when this thing happened. There was a Baha'i in Haifa who had some wealth. He became ill. This is in the days of Shoghi Effendi. He became ill. He sent word to the guardian that whatever I have, I want to give to the guardian. He was in hospital. Shoghi Effendi sent his lawyer. He transferred all his properties in the name of Shoghi Effendi. All right? As God's tests would have it, he did this. Now he was all right. And he came out of hospital. All right. Now, the moment of test. This fool, I will never mention his name, but this is an example I want to give. Sent word to the guardian, now that I am well, please return my properties to me. Shoghi Effendi sent his lawyer, transferred all his properties back to him. Few months passed and he was sick again. He said, now I want to give them back to the guardian. Shoghi Effendi said no. He said no. What shall I do? I have no heirs. Give them to charity. That's all right. There are many charitable organizations in town. He even named them. We heard from Ruhiya Khanum that one year when Shoghi Effendi was away during the summer, and her father, Mr. Maxwell, was in Haifa, one of the Baha'is of the neighboring countries of Israel came over. He was wealthy. The shrine was being built. Great deal of financial crisis. He brought a large sum of money, cash, and turned the money over to Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Maxwell was delighted. He said, as soon as Shoghi Effendi comes, I'll turn over the funds to him. All right? Shoghi Effendi came back. Mr. Maxwell told him who had come and so on. He said, I won't accept that money. He said, I'm not pleased with him. I will not accept that money. We must find a way to return the money back to him. Friends, if you think of these stories and see what it says in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the very life of all deeds is my good pleasure. All things depend upon my acceptance. Every day hath a requirement. Every age has a special virtue. This is from Abdu'l-Baha. Friends, the House of Justice now is turning to the Baha'i world and saying, this is the need today of our faith, our beloved faith. What are we going to do? This is the situation. In the gleanings we read, whereas in days past every lover besought and searched after his beloved, it is the beloved himself who now is calling his lovers. Of course, this is Baha'u'llah and his lovers, nothing to do with the House of Justice and the friends. It's a big difference. But the principle is the same. Today, an institution which has been described by Abdu'l-Baha in his will and testament as the source of all good, is turning to the Baha'is of the world and say, this is what we need, friends. Come forward.
How can a rich person have the satisfaction of knowing when he or she has contributed enough?
I'm not rich, I don't know. But I know when it hurts that that point has been reached. I quoted for you one of the passages of Abdu'l-Baha's, from Abdu'l-Baha's writings, where he says that fit for sacrifice is that which is precious, that which is priceless. The poor man who has to pay, it hurts him, but he's doing it. So if a rich man is only giving in relative to what his next door neighbor is doing, that's not good enough. He's that athlete who should row, who can really row that boat on his own if he wanted to. So I cannot really define this. This is something that only the heart of the believer can itself determine as to what is that point.
How can a poor person give to the funds when he has no money for his daily subsistence?
That I understand. You know, I want to tell you a story. In the days of Abdu'l-Baha, there was a young man in Haifa who was poor. He had a job. He lost his job. He went to Abdu'l-Baha and he said, I've lost my job, I have no money, please pray for me. Abdu'l-Baha answered, he said, give in the path of God. He came back home. He says, Abdu'l-Baha tells me to give. He used the word, for those of you who are Persian, infaq. He said, you have to infaq in the path of God. No money. He needed those few monies, the few cents or cents that he had in order to buy food for himself. For so many days, it had been budgeted. He waited for a week. He went to Abdu'l-Baha again. Abdu'l-Baha said, I told you, you should make infaq in the path of God. He came back home, he thought, he said, I don't have it. He looked around in his little house. He saw a few ornaments and objects and pictures and frames and so on. That's it. The next morning, he gathered these few things and went to a second-hand shop and sold them so that he gets the cash and infaqs in the path of God as Abdu'l-Baha wanted him to. Friends, he came back home. He found two men standing at his door. Oh, where are you? We have been looking for you. This morning we thought that we have a job for you. We have come to find you. He had not yet paid that cash, but he had decided, he had made the sacrifice, he had deprived himself of something. He was attached to these things. To him, maybe to you and me, they mean nothing. To him, they meant a great deal. He sold them. He had the cash in his hand. He was happy. He was going to carry out the wish of Abdu'l-Baha. The answer was there. The reward was there. He fulfilled his promise.